another video with Arduino. Today we're going to build upon our knowledge with the Arduino time displayer by including two buttons that allow to modify for the time. So you can see if I hold this button, the time changes to 8, 9, 10, 11, and if I let go, it continues as necessary. We can also modify the minutes. And so this is all going to contribute to our bigger project, but for now, what we're going to look at is how we can modify the time using these two buttons only when we want to increase it, and also how we can display the time in AM and PM format instead of just a simple military time. So without further ado, let's hop into the circuit diagram and the code. Okay, let's take a quick look at this wiring diagram. Notice that this one, when I hold it, it controls the hours. It's changing the hours. Notice how the left ones are connected to the ground. This one controls the minutes. And just make sure to notice that these two buttons are spanning over the bridge. So let me just take this one out. Just notice that these two span over the bridge. Okay, so now let's take a look at a more organized wiring diagram online.
Okay, so here's a pretty good wiring diagram about how the Arduino should look for this project. Notice that in addition to the previous parts that we've seen before, we added two buttons and some of these wires. The purple and the blue wires are kind of like the revisions that I've made. So just a quick side note, these buttons should have kind of like pins that come out, so it should look like this. I'll also display it on screen for my project, just so it's a little more clear for you guys. But essentially what I have to know is that for the 4 pins, one should be connected here, here, then here. So you can just play around with that. Just make sure everything fits and all. Also take note to the orientation of this. Notice how this top part is the same side as the ground and the 5-volt here for these wires. So just make sure that for this orientation where you have the ground and the 5-volt like above direction for these buttons, make sure that the left is connected to the ground. Notice that here if you follow this top layer is the ground. So make sure that the left of these buttons are connected to the ground. Also make sure that the right of these buttons are connected to 9 and 8 respectively. This will control which one deals with the hours and which one deals with the minutes. The one connected to the 9, according to my code, will deal with the hours, and this one will deal with the minutes. And essentially how it works is if you hold the button, then it will increment the hour by 1. But other than that, it's basically the same. Make sure these are connected properly, and yeah, let's look at the code now. Okay, so you can see I made a few revisions here. 3, 2, 1. So I made a few revisions. What we're going to go over first is handling the button, how that works, how adjusting the time changes, and also I want to go over next how I displayed AM and PM, which actually took a lot more debugging and trial and error than you may suspect. So now let's first go over the button handling. You see it's in the void loop. So now let's start. So the first thing I want you to notice is that initially buttons are read as high. So basically when they're low, that means that the button is pushed. So this is just saying when the button is pushed, I want you to complete these lines. And so essentially what this is saying is adjust time 3600. So this is part of the time library. And essentially what it allows you to do is change the time and adjust it just as the function says. And this important thing about this is you see here, right? It says hour, and you know that it's not a variable from the way it has these two parentheses. This means that it's a function. It's referring to something, and this is not a variable, so you cannot look what value it has assigned to it. So essentially it's not assigned a value. So that means that you can't just do hour plus 3600. You have to use this function to access the hour function and adjust the time. So what this essentially allows you to do is add a certain amount of time that you want. So if we go here, we're going to revisit the epoch time. So what I want you to notice is that for many of you students, you are familiar that if you add an hour, obviously the epoch timestamp increases. And essentially what the epoch timestamp is, if it wasn't clear in the previous video, is that the epoch timestamp is keeping track of all of the seconds that have passed. So as of July 3rd, 2023, this is how many seconds have passed. So let's see, if I increase it by 18, you can see that the timestamp increases. So this means that if I increase the time or the hour, the number actually increases by 3,600, right? Because there's 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour. So 60 times 60 is 3,600. So what this is saying is add 3,600 when this button is pressed. So basically just add an hour. And what this does is it will change this epoch timestamp. So let's say if it was 9:45 and you press the button. So you press the button and it goes to 10. So now it's been added 3600, and what the Arduino does is it will refer back to the function and basically say just calculate this after you add 3600, and then we delay. So basically all it's doing in simple terms is if the button is pressed, add 3600 to the epoch timestamp, and when you do that, display the time when you're done and wait 200 milliseconds. Same thing applies to the minute. You already know that 60 seconds are in a minute. So essentially this is saying if you want to increase by 1 minute, add 60 seconds to the epoch timestamp, delay 200 milliseconds, and basically just calculate it. So all this is saying is if you press the hour button, it increases by an hour, and if you press the minute button, it will increase by a minute. And an important thing to notice is that it is delayed, so there's a delay. So if by holding the button, you're incrementing it by 1 hour every single time. This ensures that if you hold it for long, it's not gonna rapid fire and go shoot from 2 to all the way till 12. This will increase or increment in moderation. Same applies to minute. And so now let's check out the AM and PM format. So now let's take a look at our first section with displaying AM and PM. So the first conditional that I have here is pretty important. It just accounts for those corner cases where we have 12 a.m. and 12 p.m. For military time, 12 a.m. would be represented as 0 o'clock. So oftentimes for the Arduino LCD, it would just present 00, semicolon, the minutes, semicolon, the seconds. But for this situation, all I wanted to do was just display 12 if it's 12 a.m. or if it's 12 p.m. So just print 12, nothing too complicated there. Now we get to this part, and this actually caused me a lot of issues. So the problem with the Arduino LCD is that, let's say, okay, so it's going to say time. We have time, right? And then we have the time here. So what would often happen is, let's say it was 12 o'clock, right? Let's just create something like 12:59 and then 12 or something, right? So ultimately, when it reached 1, because after 12 it equals 1, right? Because it resets. What would happen is it would cause a place shift. So instead of a 2 being here, it would move everything over. So essentially, after it hit 12, everything would, I guess, essentially move over to the right. So since it moved over to 1, it would say something like this: 1:58:12. Right? So nothing too complicated there, right? Everything would move over. That's actually what we wanted. But actually, what happened in reality is after everything shifted over, there would be a 9 at the end, and then everything would continue. So this would move to 12, this would become 13, then 14, and 15, etc. But this 9 would be a placeholder here. And so I was thinking, how could we get rid of that 9? And what I said eventually I came up with is making sure that there is a placeholder. So instead, if it changes from 12 dot dot, and I'm just gonna continue it, when it changes to 1, what instead of getting rid of this 2 and causing a placeholder shift, what I wanted to do was just create a placeholder there. So if it went from 12 to 1, it would just be 0 and then 1. So that's essentially how I solved it. Just add a 0 in front. But it's important to note that it only should happen for cases where there's no double digits, right? We only want it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But if it gets to 10, then it will cause another placeholder shift where it will go 10 and then yada, yada, yada. But then there's going to be a 0 here. And then ultimately, when it comes back to 1, when it goes back to 1, there's going to appear a 9 at the end. So essentially, we just want to keep the placeholders the same. We want 0, 1, 2 digits, just like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So my solution here is what I want to do is, since there's only 12 hours on a clock, what I wanted to do was find the remainder, right? So if it's 13 o'clock on military time, it's actually just 1 o'clock. So that's how we use the modulus to find the remainder. So we assign that to variable r. It's important to note that the r integer is located here. If r is less than 10, so that's what we were just saying. If it's a number less than 10, if it doesn't have double digits, we just want to add a 0 in front of it so that it has 2 digits. 0, 9 has the same digits as 1, 0, or 9 has the same digits as 10 with a 0 in front. So we want to print the value and then just print the value to the serial monitor. All this is saying is basically, if it's lower, if it only has 1 digit, then we want to add a 0 in front so to make it 2 digits. And if it's greater, if it already has 2 digits like 10, 11, and 12, then just print this value. And we use that using a if statement so that we can print a 0 if it's only 1 digit. Now we get down to this last case where if it's greater than 9, if it's not greater than 9, or it's not greater than 12, 0, or 24, what we want to do is just simply print 0 and the hour. And this accounts for cases where it's just simple display. So that's just 1 a.m., 2 a.m., things that it has in common with military time. So that's 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10, and then 10 a.m. would come to this conditional block, 11, 12, and then you have to start using the modulus operator. But this block accounts for the values that the military time and AM and PM have in common, as I stated before. So essentially, I'm just going to do a quick overview. This allows 12 to be displayed if it's 12, 0, or 24 according to military time. If it's greater, this allows 1-digit numbers to have a 0 in front and make sure that the hours do not go above 12. And this last block accounts for displaying number values that are 1 digit and have in common with the military time. And this is just some final touches, just for the user to know if it's AM or PM. So if the hour is less than 12, so numbers that are in common with the military time, we want to display AM. And then if it goes over 12, we know that that's PM, right? Because the second rotation for an AM PM clock, the second rotation is PM. The first rotation is AM. So this is just saying if it's before the first rotation, display AM. If it's during the second rotation, display PM. And just make sure of the placement. You can see that print digits seconds, it should be after print digit seconds because we want AM and PM to be appended to the clock values after. So just keep in mind where you place these strings. But besides that, there are not many other changes. And yeah, I hope you were able to learn some logical reasoning from this process.
That's going to be it for today's video. I really hope you learned something about circuits or connections or different modules like the button. I really hope you learned how we can use logic and troubleshooting to find an answer, to use programming, and solve the problem through coding. So this is going to build off the previous project where we're now able to modify the time, and we're going to build off this in order to build a fully functioning alarm clock system. So definitely stay tuned for that. If you like the video, make sure to leave a like and comment what you thought about today's video. And if you really enjoy the series and these videos, don't hesitate to subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.